This week on Technically Creative, I'm joined by someone who honestly is kind of the reason this podcast exists. Erik Weaver is the head of the Virtual and Adaptive Production Group at the Entertainment Technology Center at USC. If you don't know Erik or the ETC, you probably should. He sits at the literal intersection of technology and creativity in entertainment. ETC is an organization funded by all the major studios with a remit to explore, prototype, and build the future of how we create, distribute, and consume entertainment. The board of the ETC is made up of representatives of all the major studios: Disney, Warner, Paramount, Sony, Universal, and even Epic Games. And his job is to make sure that all the technology being developed actually works for creators and studios in the real world. When Erik and I talked, we covered a lot of ground. We got into how the ETC was born out of George Lucas's desire not to see the VHS Betamax wars repeated in the digital age. We talked about how they helped define the first digital cinema standards, and also how studios are approaching AI, not just about all the hype and stuff, but through responsible model training, copyright provenance, and heavily designed workflows. And also how projects that he's working on, like the Bends, are pushing generative production to its limits, blending LoRAs and training with cloud pipelines and traditional VFX workflows. We also get into how he's thinking about storytelling, user engagement, and avoiding becoming the modern opera of entertainment. This episode is a must listen if you care about where entertainment is actually going and speaking to somebody who's really doing the work. And Erik generously shared some of the links to his current work, which you can find in the show notes. So please look there. It'll help you give context to what we're talking about. So anyway, very excited. I think you're really going to like this one. Here's my conversation with Erik Weaver. Well, thank you for being on the podcast, Erik. You're Erik Weaver, head of virtual and adaptive production at the Entertainment Technology Center at USC. You, to me, are one of the interviews I've been wanting to have for a really long time because you're the guy. You're the guy engaging with as much tech as can possibly be thrown at you all the time, with the specific remit of making sure that it's being used in the best and most interesting ways for entertainment distribution, entertainment creation, creative ideation. So it's really excited to talk to you. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
You're absolutely welcome. And you're correct. I do get to explore a lot of really cool, new and innovative ways to work with the whole intent of making it practical and usable for the actual industry. I'm not interested in just theory and other things. I believe in getting my hands dirty.
What a great place to be. I mean, USC, for people who don't really know, USC is the kind of soul's home, and it's where so many of the industry leaders in entertainment were educated. And it's got an amazing creative arts program, film program, all that kind of stuff. But can you first explain, you were at the Entertainment Technology Center at USC. Can you explain the Entertainment Technology Center and what your role is there?
Absolutely. So the ETC is an organization that was born about 33 years ago at the behest of George Lucas. And he kind of saw this whole VHS versus beta war had just happened, and he thought, I don't want that to happen with digital cinema. And so he wrote letters to all the studios and said, we should come together on certain issues. And so under the banner of SCA, or School of Cinematic Arts at USC, a nonprofit was formed. We are completely funded by the studios. So I report to a board. That board is the CTOs of Disney, Warner, Universal, Paramount, Sony, Epic Games, New Fox, and a couple others. So we just get to look at what's coming around the corner and share our knowledge with the community.
Yeah, if people don't remember the VHS beta wars, the argument is actually that the wrong technology won. Or when you look at it through the lens now, what we realize is the superior technology doesn't always win. It's usually actually the most user-friendly technology to a new generation of people using it. And beta stuck around is for professionals for years. Beta SPs and digibetas were the industry standard. Sorry, not to nerd out on the Betamax VHS wars, but it's really interesting. And it's interesting that you guys kind of sprung out of that technology war that we look on fondly, but most people won't even remember.
Yeah, we actually did the first draft of DCI, or digital cinema. So what you had was a whole bunch of people coming together saying this is what the standard should be, that we're commercial players. And the studios had to kind of come together. And so we get about 80% of the way there. And then we handed it off to SMPTE, or the Society of Motion Picture Technical Engineers.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you already mentioned your I was going to say clients, but actually they're board members because they're part of the support of the ETC. They're some of the largest entertainment producers in the world across many different verticals. How do they engage with you?
So they sit on a board, they guide our direction, they look at the areas in which we're doing research, and they have varying levels of involvement based on the studio. So I run a grant now that every year, and I am looking at what is the most cutting edge aspects of production primarily. And so right now that has just kind of shifted from OSVP or on-set virtual production, where we did a tremendous amount of work, over to AI. And how does AI really set a foundational future in a studio system? A lot of the stuff that you're seeing online right now is kind of small, really good creatives or one or two people executing short form pieces. But what we really need to understand is, how does this actually evolve and how do we have professionals on a team?
Any professionals are constantly seeking creative excellence and specificity and, things like character permanence that are still things that people are struggling with. It's funny because everybody kind of said when Nana Banana came out, and it's a little bit like the VHS beta debate is, everybody said when Nano Banana came out, oh, it's an Adobe killer. And I'm like, well, then you don't understand Adobe, because Adobe Photoshop offers a level of specificity around images that, yes, now consumers can play, but I actually look at those new consumers playing at a slightly more professional level as just more people being slowly onboarded towards Adobe. The degree of professionalism, I don't think will change. I just think more people will have ideas above their station. And that's a good thing for creativity. We want people to have ideas above their station because it means they're reaching, it means they're trying to get to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. We really want to be pushing things forward. And what you're going to see is everything's kind of multimodal as we go into the future. So you're going to be using multiple models across the board because some have different strengths and weaknesses than others. And or you have a base of expertise that feels more comfortable with a tool or a different tool.
If the last 10 years was defined by disruption to distribution, it seems like now what we're talking about is disruption to production. And what's interesting is that the disruption to distribution, nobody really noticed professional. Obviously, the upper echelons of companies noticed, but it was sort of shrugged off as well. We call it AI slop now. Back then, we called it useless and pointless, empty calories of creator content on YouTube. That was what we were calling it then. But nobody really recognized this disruption that was coming until Netflix. And Netflix was slow. They were using, the big studio's previous work and just licensing it, very standard, like any television, distributor would. And then suddenly they started creating their own content. It was like, oh, I see, something different is happening here. And so it kind of all came in through the back door and very slowly. It seems like this transition to generative AI, people are much more aware of, much more afraid of right out of the gate. Are you seeing that as well?
Absolutely see a fear, but I'm seeing it kind of shift here. So if you take a couple years back, you look at kind of the shock and awe that some of the OpenAI stuff did, especially around Sora, where there was a Television Academy event and people were literally booing folks on the stage around this. Because in that shock and awe, they thought, my job is done. My career is over. There is no future. And that's absolutely not the truth. We are using, like Clarence Major, a production designer on our thing. We're using, Roberto Schaefer, a DP, to help our framing, our visuals, or everything. So all these roles are still absolutely critical in professional grade work when you're doing it. And so the year later, I spoke at the most recent Television Academy AI event, and people are now much more embracing. And they really are seeing how their jobs will still be there, but secondarily, they're seeing it as this whole tool and a new tool set. And when you would have started with something like virtual production or on-set virtual production with LED volumes, originally we'd have called that a tool in the toolbox. But now anything that's not practically shot, we're considering virtual production. So AI, hybrid, all these other forms, it's almost a whole new toolbox to solve problems. And if we, the community, do not embrace these new tools in this new toolbox, then we're going to lose much of the world to the Silicon Valley types, or the types that don't come from more or less the same soul as us, where we just love the heart and soul of filmmaking.
Yeah. Sora gets, a lot right, but there's a lot it gets wrong. And you had to, especially those first videos that came out, it was traditional VFX workflows and pipelines. I mean, it was,
Yeah.
yes, that was used as a tool, but like, I mean, you're talking about, huge amounts of work.
And still, when you're using AI, it's a little bit like a wild horse without a bit. You can absolutely get to where you want to go, but sometimes it kind of takes you in these weird journeys, right? And it does need some corralling. It does need some VFX, some traditional tools. We're using a lot of Blender and Nuke and other things in finishing some of these shots right now.
Yeah, and now, there's just, new tools like training LoRAs, becomes a significant part of an already complex VFX pipeline. But I always feel like it used to be that producers, especially VFX and post people, them getting a new tool or a new piece of tech was, I mean, it's every
Exciting.
yeah, so
It
exciting.
was exciting and fairly often, and in this situation though, I kind of feel like we had moved from with OSVP to a F1 car. And with AI, the progression is more like a rocket ship. It's like you almost can't possibly know everything evolving and changing any particular time. But yeah, there's a lot of change happening right now. And you just got to start finding the people that you respect or trust. So let's go back to this LoRa thing. So I actually really love some of these conversations. So when you're looking at a LoRa model, you're training a thing, a character, an environment, a background. And that's off of a larger video model, right? So, for example, in the movie or short we're doing right now called The Bends, we had to create a blobfish because it's about a blobfish and traditional models don't have that blobfish. Well, we have a problem here because that data doesn't exist. So we had to go to research institutes, find images of the fish, take those and use Meshi to convert them into three-dimensional models, clean them up, write a script to reposition them and light them, and I'll share a video with you here, and then train the LoRa. And another trick about training a LoRa that's going to be in a small data set or a private one is that you need a large VRAM footprint. So we had to burst to run pod or mass compute to get 100 gigs of VRAM for these training models. Some of the new VO3 and other things will allow you to train on set, but the challenge here is that as you shift into professional workflows or characters or people, SAG does not allow you to let that data slip into a larger data set. So you must have it in a controlled environment and you must delete it at the end, which is a critical component.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day who kind of said, actually in this world, access to, a constantly evolving or the infrastructure of an AWS or whatever else, that becomes such a huge part of what you're doing is understanding what the usage
Yes.
is going to be, what that cost is going to be. That actually, yes, things are a lot cheaper, but that doesn't mean they're free. And they still get very
Absolutely not
expensive
free.
as these high-end use cases.
Yeah, in our situation, we had an amazing architect named Con Wilms from formerly of AWS who helped build us a zero trust network that was all on virtual machines. So when the artists would log in, they would be able to have access to their LoRa models and the different tools they needed to use and any other data they needed. So they could drop things in really quick. So it's pretty cool. And you'll get to see that. I'll share the clip with you of that as well.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely. I mean, we'll put the clip up. For the moment, I'll just kind of say about it. What I also think is fascinating about the bends is obviously this is a blobfish, but blobfish, the whole point of it is that it changes dramatically over the course. So
Yes.
you need character permanence without too much character permanence. You need because
Correct.
you're seeing this thing turn from a very structured fish into just kind of a gel, honestly, on the surface.
Yes.
Sorry, not to spoil it, but I think and it's really remarkable.
Something that some people might not get in watching the film originally. But yes, It's about a transformative journey of this fish, right? And so we had to create multiple models at different levels of depth in the sea, so that it does look different at different times. And you might be wondering why, but you hit the nail on the head there.
Well, it's very cool. How does that workflow look like? I mean, I imagine that you're still engaging. You start with a traditional VFX workflow, an animation workflow, and then you kind of look for the moments you can inject AI to reduce cost or reduce timeline.
So we actually started backwards. So we did a much more traditional pipeline in which we did storyboards. Then we built a custom shot grid integration. And then we did what's called a Gen Jam. And in the Gen Jam, we got everyone around a table, including AI artists, the consulting DP, the writer, Kyan Kim, who did the AI infrastructure and tech piece, and the shot grid team, and we basically broke it down. And in that breakdown, it was 8 scenes across 86 shots. And so each person was handed their components. And I'll actually show you a video here so you can see exactly how they did that, or you can see the character consistency to the models. So now when they each log in, they have access to multiple models, they have all the LoRAs, they have all the pre-trained data, and they try and get it as close to the previs or animatic slash story that they have, right? And so you're going AI first, and then from there, we're doing a layering of things on top of that, which are things like debris or silt, a couple other things for image quality. So then we have that whole layer of aspects. The last part we have is in this particular film, we're getting very sophisticated. One of the major holdbacks I constantly hear from the studios are the quality isn't good enough, right? So what you're traditionally getting out is roughly 7 color. That's not acceptable if you're going to go into any kind of real post workflow. So we have created an entire pipeline or workflow simply to get us to 32-bit EXRs. And it is not a simple one button solves everything. It is step, 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 process step kind of aspect.
Yeah, kind of similar to I mean, I didn't like a lot of these, but the 3D conversions that were hot for a minute. It wasn't just press a button. There was still a bit of roto to do and a bit of things that required attention. And still, I think I never saw a truly good one.
I wasn't a big fan either.
Oh,
I
exactly.
wasn't a
But yeah, I mean, even, upresing, something like Back to the Future is, they're doing a thing in IMAX. I mean, people would be shocked to understand how tricky that is. I mean, it's not going to
Yes.
the full 70 millimeter, but it is being upresed, and there's a lot of work that goes into just taking that and blowing it up like that.
Yeah, it's actually quite amazing if you look at the Wizard of Oz pipeline to the Sphere. It literally took Ben Grossman's team a year to execute that. A very hard work. So yeah, it is not a simple thing. It is a whole workflow unto itself.
In terms of like, your overarching mission, virtual and adaptive production, I mean, I imagine that do just simple production workflow things fall into that? Does, budgeting or machine learning on variance between expected bid budget versus actual and, pipeline work and scheduling and day of days, and things like that. Does that level of stuff come into it? Or is it only when a production moves into a, virtual environment or VFXC environment or,
So when we do these things, that is a kind of a little bit of a challenge for us. I don't have a pipeline team per se, so I have to build everything from scratch. So we do a lot of software integrations and custom API builds between things. I just released the Europa workflow, which I'll share with you, which is quite sophisticated. It's a cloud first shot at Sony Stage 7. These pipelines get exceptionally complex. We do evaluate everything from some aspects of budgeting. We don't get into the nitty gritty there, but we do use all the traditional tools wherever possible, and we build continuity between the tools. We also really care about metadata nowadays. Analyzing the data and metadata is critical. Rebel Fleet helped us on the Europa project, in which we grabbed every single bit of metadata we possibly could and then fed it into a master system. And then Instead of doing a sidecar or embedded file, we now have a database that can only send or will only send the data that's needed to the different departments as it's needed. For example, on that one, we were also using anamorphics, which is very difficult on an LED screen. So we had Cook lenses that were custom mapped. And with all that data, we were able to fix that in VFX.
It's funny, even with all of these tools, my face still lights up the most with talk of anamorphic lenses and in-camera VFX, and people making a model of a head and hitting it with a hammer and blood flying everywhere. Like that's the fun stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, do you is it part of your mission at all to be integrating with old technologies? I only say, I don't mean that to sound pejorative, but I mean, these are the technologies that DPs are most comfortable with and that production designers are most comfortable with. Is part of the remit to make sure you're still speaking that technological language and bringing those tools that they know very well up? Or is it kind of listen, in many cases, you got to forget what you knew and talk about what you can know now. Like, how do you balance that?
Yes. So we are really trying to bridge the gap of tomorrow. And in that, a lot of it is bringing traditional things like Scripty, Sync on Set, some of these other tools, ShotGrid, like I said, that create traditional frameworks or structures around things that people can classically understand. If you find something that's radically new and completely revamp something, sometimes we consider it, sometimes we don't. But if you think about a tool like, for example, Unreal is a fairly new tool into the environment. It's only been really there in the last 6-7 years, possibly, for this field. But sometimes there's something innovative enough that you do kind of have to embrace it. If you look at a piece like we're working on with Asteria called Chickaboom, we try to look more at utility AI than traditional generative AI in that one. It was an animation piece. And so what you're also seeing is a huge transformation in the tools currently in the pipeline and how they work. So finding the best different aspects of these new tools that will be able to replace or slightly change the pipeline to make them more efficient or effective is something we're stretching.
Talking a little bit about, there was so much, you spoke about Unreal Engine there, and, obviously The Mandalorian came out. That was, a great, showcase for what the volume could do. It was very exciting. Everybody was like, this is the future of production. And then generative AI comes out, and now everybody's kind of forgotten about the volume even as a tool. And, colloquially, I certainly don't mean that producers have forgotten about the volume in a practical way. But are you finding that generative AI is pulling a lot too much focus away from that? Because that seemed all by itself like a absolute game changer.
Is shifting a lot of the focus, absolutely taking the shine away. But what you find if you're really looking at professional workflows, there's a bunch of tools and lessons that are critical that we learned from virtual production or on-set virtual production. Like the VAD, for example. I can now create VAD scenes or virtual art department scenes that may be gray boxed or simple. I could be using a mixture of different AI tools to build that or simplify that. I can then retexture with AI. I can then shoot, I can convert my plates through basically a restyling the videos. So there's a lot of things that you can still use within that toolbox and processes that will help benefit the overall production.
It's funny because it feels like, the disruption is happening at every single level. Everybody's kind of very focused on the disruption happening at the level of the armchair creator. Everybody's like, oh, somebody's going to make a movie in their dorm room. And it's like, I'm sure somebody will, its level of quality will be debatable and it will improve over time and they'll get experience and all that kind of stuff. But obviously, you've got many stratas of filmmaking. There's obviously independent filmmakers, sort of, people like Sean Baker, when he did Tangerine just on his iPhone, he's demonstrated clearly that this is a professional grade camera and it can do what you need it to do. Then you've got, obviously indie filmmakers who are always trying to do more with less. Then you've got the studio level. It seems like just everybody's going to be kind of leveled up in their quality, and there's still going to be an appetite for entertainment at each one of those quality levels.
I completely agree with you. I mean, yes, does it give a little bit more power or empower a user economy? Absolutely. The MCNs have existed for a while. They're out there. They're not going away. They have their own audience, and the high grade independents and premium films also have their place. And what we're seeing a lot is these technologies are allowing people to punch above their weight, something that could have cost them a lot more. They're now able to execute within their budget. And that's what's kind of exciting to many people out there.
The studios, obviously, and all of them are relate to you. And I think that what's very interesting is studios have always obviously been very reticent to output generative AI content on a consumer level. Obviously, because of all of the copyright concerns, they are the IP owners of all of the most valuable copyright entertainment material in the world. So they don't want to get it wrong. They also don't want to step on each other's feet as both a professional courtesy, but also because of the legal implications. But the fact that they're engaging with you, is, I think, it really encouraging. And, it's very interesting that they're not blind to it just because they're not outputting things. And, obviously, Warner Brothers has the AI content lab that is experimenting, and it's run by Kurt Zechmeister, and he's doing some very cool stuff. And it's really exciting. And they're excited too, but they're not willing to output it. And so people kind of say, oh, the studios are being too slow to uptake this stuff. I'm like, well, they're not. They're being responsibly slow to putting it out, but not blind, and certainly not ignorant. In fact, I think between the ETC and the things that they're doing internally, I think that they're kind of on the front lines of it. They're just not showing their hand yet.
Well, so again, like you said, there's two primary legal issues you have a problem with. And the first one is your models. Your models can make or break a studio. So when I look at the industry, there's three types of models. There's clean models, where they've ethically sourced or paid for all the content to train it. There's really only three, maybe four companies that I'm aware of that have done that. That would be Moon Valley Marley model with Asteria. That'd be Google, because they've trained on YouTube content, and that would be Adobe. So that's your top tier. I also believe NVIDIA has something going on with the Getty Foundation for original content. Beyond that, you're going to have a level of models that say they're going to offer writs and warrants. That means they'll go to court for you and they'll fight, right? And then at the very bottom, you've got the wild, wild west, right? And so that's your tier one problem. Your tier one problem is, am I going to spend the rest of my life in litigation? None of these studios want to do that. That's not worth their time. So they've got to solve this first. The second problem is exactly what you said. It's the copyright issue. However, we are resolving how to solve that. And there's two use cases here that highlight that. Slice of American Cheese, which is the first AI piece of material that got copyright. And it wasn't just simply based on prompts. It was about proving that they had manipulated the AI image later, and they got their copyright. And
Significant human intervention. Yeah.
Yes. And then the second one is Critters. Critters is the first actual animation piece in which they were able to document that as well and get copyright. So these two are the pillars that you have to have solved at a studio level before you can release these content. So like we're writing custom comfy UI nodes to track provenance, creative intent, all of that stuff, right? So that we can file copyright on any of these things. And then your second two major issues for the studios are going to be control and consistency and quality. So we're already dealing with quality, as I talk with about, and I have a clip that I can share with you about control and consistency. It is getting there. It's not 100%. Like I said, it's a little bit of a wild horse, still a little, but it is changing on a daily basis.
But I mean, as the copyright owners, I mean, the argument becomes like, why aren't they, training their own model on their own IP? And that way they're sort of theoretically legally black box to begin with.
Yeah, so that's what you would do. You would take a clean model and then you would begin to use a LoRA to create a custom model based on your own content. This is kind of where they were going with the legendary deal with Runway. So that's your first example of a studio heading in that particular direction. One other thing you got to realize is that a lot of the studios do still really want to make sure that they're lockstep with the guilds and unions and other things. You might not know, but in the last basically agreement for SAG, they have to report all the tools on a quarterly basis that they are using in any of these films, right? So again, they don't want to throw cold water on, and I mean, it's not fair for me to speak directly for them, but I would say they really don't want to throw cold water in the face of their beloved, the people that create those. So it's a mixed bag here. They're trying to move forward in a cautious, genuine step, as far as I can see and tell.
Silicon Valley and Hollywood have always been at loggerheads to a degree, and the thing that always kind of gets me about the relationship is that very often Hollywood says, "Well, we do this way," and the Silicon Valley goes, "Yeah, but if you just did it this way now, it would solve all your problems," and they're constantly speaking. They're both speaking English, but they're speaking a different language.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you see in that kind of clash of civilizations, as it were? What do you see as the places where they're incredibly aligned and the places where there's unbelievable friction?
Everyone realizes they have to evolve. And, Hollywood has traditionally been a really technically forward thinking or institution where constantly have been growing over the years. If you look at the history there, it was interesting. I was recently at one of the major Silicon Valley groups, and they're like, look, man, we're a bunch of computer scientists. We're not filmmakers. We don't speak that language. We don't really understand what you need. And so that's why I see partnerships like Asteria Moon Valley being great, because Asteria is filmmakers, Moon Valley are machine, groups that are working and saying, I need this feedback. I need these aspects. So I can't give you the answer to all of it, but I think that it's a little bit, swords sharpening swords here, as they fight to the top. I think that they will both help each other along the way.
That's a great way to look at it. Is at the end of the day, each group will be better. I think that like the fear, obviously, from people I speak to in entertainment, and obviously this is no news to you, but with Amazon buying MGM, Paramount being taken over by an Oracle proxy, that something will be lost about the kind of tradition of filmmaking. I mean, obviously, USC and the ETC being born out of the mind or the impetus of somebody like George Lucas, who has undeniably been a clarion voice across physical production, VFX, sound, practical storytelling. I mean,
and he lives up in the valley.
Yeah, exactly. He's not far away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think that's the fear, is that something about the tradition will be lost. Do you share any of that fear? Do you think there are things that we should be doing to ensure that the tech forward entertainment world that we might be going into remains as charming as the one that we've just come out of, or is the era of filmmaking we've come out of?
So I kind of, on my own personal beliefs, think that what we actually need to be a little more afraid of is becoming a modern opera. When you look at the new generation, they want agency, they want interactivity, they want a bit of control. They're not obsessed with the quality in the features that we are. Most of them are watching on iPhones. I just hope we don't become too obscure. I think that that's what we have to worry about the most at this particular juncture. Um, so, and again, that's a personal opinion.
I mean, that brings it up an interesting point. I mean, user generated content, as you said, like, people want to be engaged. They want to be, part of that storytelling. What are you exploring any technologies or storytelling tech use cases that enable UGC on a broader interactive level? I mean, apart from just people prompting scenes and editing them together.
So I do have I don't know what the best word for this, but I basically have a transmedia program in which I empower 5 teams to look at story from a younger perspective, or that this generation perspective. And so we're kicking that off right now for this year. It's our second year doing that. So yes, I am still exploring that. I think that there is a sleeping giant in some of these things. That obviously we see a large format, which I would include, Sphere, IMAX, Cosm's doing an amazing job. I
Yeah,
think
I
that
went to
large
see that
format
Matrix
drops.
thing. It was great.
Yeah, I'd even categorize Apple Vision Pro in that. I'd love to see if that changes or what. But I think that there's a huge sleeping giant around the corner that's not tapped, and it may not be tapped for another year or two. But I definitely think the whole concept of stories and engagement with stories has a very strong future. And please don't forget that the whole thing is about telling stories. So tech is wonderful and beautiful, but it's here to serve story, in our opinion.
Yeah. You said it, you talked about kind of, is it an accelerator or just a cohort of, young people, the initiative you just talked about?
We basically go to USC students and we put up an application process where 5 teams are allowed, and we give them budget and everything, and they come up with their own ideas.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I think that like what's very cool about that is that, you obviously there's the engaging with the studios, but then you are sitting at USC, you are engaging with the next era and the next generation of storytellers. And if you focus too much on what the studios think about and care about all the time, you're going to get this skeuomorphic lens on the next generation of entertainment, and it'll look like a more technologically advanced example of the previous generation of entertainment. Whereas the opportunity, I presume, of sitting at USC is you go, well, how about people who, don't have the same viewpoint on the industry and think that it changing and it putting down its guardrails is the greatest thing that could ever happen.
So, actually, a fascinating story here is that the ETC at the board meetings, every other board meeting, we used to have a situation where we would bring in 6 or 7 current students, and the board would then ask them questions. And it would be really interesting to see the completely difference in opinion. So, I don't know if you remember when there was something around called Movie Pass, right? Every single one of the students went to the movies at least once, if not twice a week, when Movie Pass existed. They said it's a social activity. All of our friends have it. We all go, right? And guess what? As soon as that was lobbed off, they stopped going to the movies. And it's like, oh.
So close. you were
I mean, and
right
I don't know how
there.
to make something like that work, but
Yeah.
it's just, we can empower a whole new generation to love cinema in that physical form. It would be awesome.
Yeah, there used to be a thing in the UK, I remember, called Orange Wednesdays, and it was Orange. I don't know if it even still exists or it's been consumed by a larger telecoms company. But if you had an Orange mobile phone, you got a free movie pass every Wednesday. And it
Wow.
was, yeah, I did some of the advertising for it, and it was incredibly popular. When it was first launched, our budget was next to nothing. And then I think 6 months later, they did a renewal campaign and our budget had tripled because they were like, it's one of the most popular initiatives we've ever done, and it's like
I mean, it almost feels like this whole idea of Kodak saying, I don't want to promote digital cinema because it's going to eat my film business. I don't want to eat into my revenues of traditional theater. Therefore, I'm not going to do this. And I'm like, oh no, please.
what do you think? I mean, getting your sort of prognostication hat on, I mean, are we even able to keep pace with this rate of change? I mean, are you, do you feel like the stuff that you're doing now, for example, the bends, is there a sense at all that like by the time you're finished with the production, the workflow is almost, out of date? I mean, it feels like things are changing so fast that how do you even
That
keep
is
pace?
absolutely a concern. And as a matter of fact, you have to keep putting lines in the sand and saying, this is how it is now. And then you have to eventually change that line. It is very, very hard. So, like, we traditionally release a white paper, like maybe 6 months later. That doesn't work anymore. You just can't do that. So, we're beginning to do a lot more social media in a real time nature. So, going to ET centric on IG or LinkedIn and catching what we're doing, because knowledge is now and it's fleeting. And you're trying to stay a little more high level when we're saying things or suggesting things. So look at this from this point of view, or how this would impact your workflow.
But I think, listen, I think that's the future. I mean, I think that we all know that building out loud is a, a huge part of the modern consumption experience of craft. I mean, just the other day, I spent 15 minutes watching somebody clean a very dirty rug. It was very satisfying. And people kind of say we're losing craft. I don't think so. That rug cleaner was a craftsman, and I watched it for 15 minutes. I think that actually entertainment on some level has a craft problem only because it's not exporting its own craft in real time. There would be nothing better than watching somebody who's producing a gory horror film, an A24 film or a Blumhouse film, showing me in real time what potentially somebody getting their head crushed in with I should speak to my therapist that I keep using this example, but some VFX, some practical effect of somebody getting hit and blood splattering everywhere. I think that entertainment certainly could be in a situation where if you've followed a production designer while they've been making a film, I think there's a beautiful future in which you might go to the film for the VFX person, for the production designer, for the makeup and hair person who you have been invested in their story. You saw them go, I can't believe I just got booked on Superman. I've been doing indies forever, and now I'm working on Superman. And let's be real. I stopped watching trailers about 2 years ago, and I kind of put my headphones in. Even at the movies, if I show up too early, I put my head down, I listen to music.
I hate it. They tell you the whole story.
Tell you the whole story. And, after Endgame, anytime there's a surprise new character, it's in the trailer. I'm like, well, what's the point? And I do think that you're giving away so much anyway. I'm seeing the costumes. Why can't I see the costume designer, in real time outputting that stuff? Once the trailer is released, let the costume designer release dailies on what it was like on set. I think that's a huge opportunity for physical craft.
Yeah, I mean, there's some aspect of a flatty or a film is really going to be just a introduction to a world, right? And then narrative or breaking off pieces or interactive pieces are going to be the more engaging components. And I wonder how that will evolve over the years. One other thing that I thought was a really interesting story is USC does run an AI film program. And someone had gone to a senior official and said, why have I even bothering spending the money getting this degree? And they took the course. And at the end of the course, they said, I absolutely understand why I have to have a degree now, because I have to understand how to tell a story. And yes, some of the technological components will change, but if you don't get that story aspect, that way in which to craft a narrative to take somebody on a journey, then you're still gonna look bad no matter what technology you're using.
Just if I could kind of tell people where they can find where you're kind of building out loud and you're sharing all that stuff, where is that being shared?
So our white papers are published on etcentric.org. I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. We have ETC at USC on IG. So we're a little bit around, and just reach out, connect with us, follow some stuff. Again, we're not a for-profit organization. We're not trying to push a brand or a product or anything like that. We're just trying to look at it at the future and execute within context of story. And sometimes we're wrong, sometimes we're right, sometimes we fail. We always deliver product though. But again, we're just trying to look around the corner and be helpful.
Let's say somebody is already in the creative industries or is technologically advanced, very committed to this. What is the path or the place where they should be going for the most amount of information about, what they should be doing to learn about training LoRAs and understand how to get towards closer to character permanence across shots? Where does one go for that information?
So, I mean, Beyond what we're releasing, I think Curious Refuge has some really good courses. Caleb over there is amazing. I love his weekly or bi-weekly videos. They're really great to show you what's updating. Beyond that, it's kind of tricky. You just gotta hunt and peck out there. I say that apologetically, but I have access to a lot of very bright minds, and so we work through problems with those minds. Everyone might not have that access.
The creatives I always gravitated towards most were the ones who kind of would come in with bags under their eyes going like, I couldn't sleep because I found this new tech and I just was playing with it all night and I kind of did this and I kind of did that. Or
That's exactly what you want those people who just are fascinating, wanting to learn, wanting to change, wanting to get their hands on it. And I guarantee you that that's not just a this generation thing. I mean, again, I'm working with a lot of wonderful folks from unions and guilds that just that's how they've always been. I want the new lens. I need the new sensor. I play with this, so let's do that, and they're embracing this just as much as anybody. So.
yeah. Yeah, I mean like we said earlier on, it's like, these are the things that should be exciting. I mean, I remember when DreamWorks came out with they cracked mud. That was that was such a huge, moment. And then, that package to be able to do mud reliably went around to every, post house in the world. And, people kind of realized what they did and got so excited about it. And I think that there's a world in which, if you're in the creative industries, I think that the most important tool in your toolbox is an open mind and curiosity. And it sounds like you just get to live in that every day. I'm incredibly jealous. It sounds like a fantastic position to be in.
Pretty great. And I think the biggest reward for me is when I see the people that just need a chance rise up. And we've seen some absolutely amazing people come out of some of these films that we're making that just flourish. So it's awesome.
Yeah. If I can ask one more question, I mean, is there anything you're working on now that you're particularly excited about, or even anything you're working on now that you're particularly nervous that you might not get right? I mean, what's just beyond your horizon even?
I'm working on two key pieces right now, the bends, which is a purely generative, like we mentioned about the blobfish. And then I'm working one on pathways where we shot with iPhones and we shot practically, and we are now changing everything out using AI. That one is becoming a little more complex or tricky, nuance-wise, than we expected. Tools like Beeble.ai are amazing, or Fota, which is lensing the scenes, are fantastic, but we're not quite there yet. The next level or the next thing that we will be touching is performance. And I think that performance is the current edge of tomorrow.
Do you think that'll be the white whale? I mean, is it something that you feel is achievable within a period of time, or do you think it will? I mean, Uncanny Valley, will it be just Uncanny Valley sort of forever?
It will definitely be achievable here in the next 9 to 24 months. Its application is going to be what's curious. Like I would really only see a lot of this for things like dangerous stunts, challenging environments, things like that. But who knows where it will be taken.
Right. Well, Erik Weaver, thank you so much for being on. It's been a real thrill for me. You were slightly my white whale. I just, I just have been so jealous that your job exists and you get to do it for so long that, talking to you has been a real thrill and I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.